Welcome to BizTech Forward, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights at the intersection of business and technology. Let's move forward together.
Hi everyone, welcome back to BizTech Forward. I'm Anni, your host, and in the next couple of episodes, I'd like us to focus on AI. I know, shocking, but it's all we're here these days, and wherever you look, you see a company's AI first or a company's transforming with AI, and I'd really like to understand what is hype, what is real, what is actually happening. So to discuss all this, I'm joined by Alistair Wandesforde, a senior executive at DataArt, who is leading and supporting large-scale digital transformations across different sectors, including finance, travel, healthcare, and education. And more than that, he also leads DataArt's program lab and co-leads communications for the global account RMO organization. Alistair, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Anni. Pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about what's really going on with AI. Hopefully we'll talk about the messy reality and things you don't really hear that often and where are the actual opportunities these days. So, Alistair, you have so much experience, more than 25 years in the business. And I bet you are having a lot of customer communications and you watch everybody ready to add AI to their pitch desks and generally, like when you walk into a room and you hear somebody say, "We are AI ready," are they? Like, what do you actually see?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should be clear as maybe sort of frame up the conversation. So the area of this entire sort of AI experience that I am particularly interested in is where it hits with people, right? So I'm not, unlike so many amazing engineers in our organization, I'll be clear, I'm not an engineer first, right? I'm sort of, I was going to say people first, but that's our motto and sounds a little bit corny. But I'm very interested in the intersection of new technologies or technologies in general, and people. And so, I think that'll be the context I think that I can provide best for this conversation. So when I walk in to an organization or we walk into an organization, and somebody or the group tells us that they're ready, the answer is like, maybe, right? That there are a lot of dimensions. I think a lot of people would say like, no, you're not ready. Or somebody might also say, yes, of course you're ready. Right. But for me, it's much more nuanced than that. I measure readiness not only in terms of, are you actually ready? Right. Because my first thought is like, well, do you have the data? Do you have the systems? Do you have the business problem that you're trying to solve? And so those things are all true. And very often it's the case that they aren't ready. Because how can you be ready for something that just showed up yesterday, right? And that you already need to be operating tomorrow. But more importantly than that, I think the thing that people aren't ready for, and I don't think any of us can really be ready, is the amount of change that they're about to go through, right? So the readiness isn't just the technical readiness and the systems readiness, or even having a problem that you're trying to solve. It's the impact of enabling these technologies or using these technologies like AI and the change that actually occurs as a result of that within your business, right? Not just in terms of how you respond to emails or communicate with people, but how does your business actually evolve? And I don't think anybody's ever ready for that level of change when something like AI comes along, or generative AI maybe in particular.
Mm-hmm. Right. Alistair, but do you think it's radically different from previous tech waves or something that happened before,
I don't think so. I mean, I was around when, my first TV was a black and white TV and there were rotary phones and, newspapers arrived daily to share the news, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of technology change in the last 40 plus years. And I mean, people way smarter than me have, the hype cycle and, documenting the way technology arrives. I think this isn't, for me, any different than any other technology wave or technology that has shown up. I think that it has characteristics that are definitely different, right? I think there's an urgency to it. There's a pervasiveness of it. There's a what is it, right? I think it is a very different kind of technology, but I don't know. At the end of the day, for me, it's just another technology. And part of the way I measure that is that it has already changed, 3, 4, 5 times since it even showed up 2 years ago, right? What it was when it arrived versus what it was 18 months ago versus what it is today is very rapidly changing. And again, new technology in particular, that's meeting the market for the first time or out in the world for the first time is going to change a lot. It's more a question of speed, the rate of change, right? And then sort of the impact that it starts to make on people, if that makes sense. So I think fundamentally, no, it's not any different. I think in terms of how it's manifesting and how we're experiencing it, sure, yeah, it's happening very quickly and very dramatically.
And I'm so glad you mentioned the people aspect and that, the entire conversation is going to be framed around people, because I also keep thinking about people and AI, and I keep reading the news and I keep reading the headlines as a person who has to keep up with media. And all the headlines these days just keep saying that AI is already replacing all the consultants, all the big consulting companies, the vendors. You are next. Like, you will not be needed anymore. Nobody needs implementation partners. But Alistair, what is actually happening on the ground? And I keep wondering, it sounds maybe a bit naive, but with all these AI transformations that are unprecedented, don't companies need more help and not less?
100%. Companies and people, the people in those companies, right, who are the very fabric of those companies, need lots of help. So people aren't going anywhere, as far as I'm concerned, in the near term, and I think even in the long term. What people need help with is what's happening, right? So what are these tools? How are they impacting my life? I think, the headlines are jobs will be eliminated. But for me, there's a way to look at that and say that's just a role or a title, right? The nature of conducting a business or running a business is not going to fundamentally change, right? If you're selling donuts or if you're selling software or if you're a financial services company, a healthcare company, you still have to provide those fundamental services to your customers, importantly in the near term, right? Like AI is not going to allow you to suddenly do brain surgery at scale, right, across the globe. So sure, are some people going to be new AI surgeons? Of course. But there's going to be a lot of demand and need for people to do traditional brain surgery going forward. And I think the same is true of most jobs. Now, the threat and the reality is that the tooling with which you do your job, right, the way in which you do some of your job, you're being pushed and almost forced to adapt much more rapidly than we've had to adapt to change in the past, right? If you think about the fax machine or text messaging or even email, right? These are things that took quite a while, even when they were sort of revolutionary or advanced, to really spread and change the way work was done, right? There was a long time before, legal documents could be signed electronically, for example, when the capability had been there for quite some time. So I think the way that I think about it is that we need to help the people, and the people in this case are everything from a business user to a developer, actually evolve the way that they're doing work in order to help them learn as quickly as possible, because some of these tools are very impressive, right? And can really improve the way you communicate or operate or improve efficiency, or at least we're told that. And at the same time, understand how what you're doing may or may not change as a result of that technology that you've now incorporated into your work, right? Customer service is still customer service at its heart, right? At a person-to-person level or at a company-to-consumer level, right? That the importance of how you handle that communication isn't going to change. The way you do that communication, of course, may absolutely change with technologies like generative AI and chatbots.
So the answer is education, and more education. Like, familiarize yourself with all the tools, learn and keep up instead of, being worried.
Yes, and a lot of therapy. I think we all have to be therapists to one another and help each other work through it. I mean, I think that's, I mean, education for sure, but I think and maybe not therapy exactly, but I think helping people work through, maybe working through the trauma of what this is, but certainly working through what the nature of these tools allow us to do is a lot of the work that we have to do. And I think we're seeing that already in our customers and in the kinds of work that we're doing and the way that people are asking for help.
Right. And over this past year, did you notice anything that seemed surprising to you with AI and people and customer conversations? Something that companies struggle with that kind of you didn't expect?
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, a lot of the struggles are sort of immediate and obvious. I think the one aspect of this change that I'm seeing increasingly is the tension or the relaxing of the tension, maybe it's the time scale. So I think the thing that is the most difficult to wrap your head around is how quickly anything is supposed to happen in an environment like this. And so there was a need when this arrived, this being AI sort of writ large. I never really know how to frame it because it's so much more, I think, than just chatbots, generative AI, right? That and I think because it was so accessible that you needed to incorporate it successfully tomorrow, right? Somebody shows it to you today, it needs to happen tomorrow. And I think the thing that is happening is that it really takes time for this to occur. And I think that is seeing people now recognize that you won't change overnight, right? The inertia of life does not actually allow you to go from 0 to 100, right? And then be effective at 100. And I think I was surprised by how quickly people really thought successful change would occur, right? And what I'm seeing now is the reality, of course, that that's just not how life works, right? Even having a baby, right? Like you're pregnant for 9 months, you're excited, there's all the buildup, the baby arrives, there's the newness of the baby. But pretty quickly after that, you still have the life that you had before, but now you have a baby and you're nurturing and growing and caring for that baby. And it ends up becoming a lifelong journey, right? So you get that same moment of, I didn't have this one day, I have it the next day. It's life changing, right? Everything's going to be different, but then it's sort of, a lot of it's the same, except you have a baby and now you have to take care of the baby. And then that, of course, alters your life forever, right? You become a parent, right? Eventually become maybe a grandparent, all those things that happen, right? So,
this is brilliant. The analogy. Gen AI and having a baby, like you painted a really clear picture, Alistair. This will stay with me.
good.
Wow.
Well, I happen to think a lot of the software development lifecycle and the work that we do is a lot like life, but that's maybe a conversation for a whole nother podcast.
And from your experience, also like from speaking about the human side of things, when you witness an AI project kind of fail or fizzle out, what is usually the reason? Is it also that the time scale and that people are so impatient to get the successful results, or?
A little bit. I mean, that would sort of be a quick, yes, I think that's right. But the way that I think about it is that, again, people don't understand how much effort it takes to actually change the way you do something, right? So I see things failing now because it was either a little bit harder to do, right? And they sort of lost attention, or they bit off a problem that was too big, or, they really weren't ready in some underlying way. So you just couldn't make the steps, right, to get there, right? It's the old, like, if you have bad data in, you're going to get bad data out, right? Like a lot of the stuff that you want to experiment with, if you don't set that experiment up in a proper way, then it's basically bound to fail before you start for any number of the reasons that I just described. And so I'm not surprised by any of the failures that I see. I'm much more interested in what have we learned as a part of that process, and have we created an environment for the next experiment, right? Like, do we have something that we can take out of what we just experienced and moved it forward? And I'm a little bit surprised when people throw up their hands and sort of feel like they've hit a wall, right? Or they've reached a stopping point. When in fact, it should be like we always talk about: fail fast, right? And work iteratively. Like, there's plenty of statistics that prove, that something like, 95% of whatever's out there hasn't made it to production, and people are still trying to figure out where their returns are. That's evidence to me of like just a very fast early cycle, right? And the next cycle is going to be even more productive. And I see that in the conversations that we're beginning to have, right? The big spends, the big investments, the leaning in has happened. Everybody sort of cranked themselves through it one time, and they've made some progress. They can maybe make some measurements, but really what I think I'm seeing now is that people are trying to put themselves into, well, where do we really want to be based on what we've learned a year from now, right? I think that the time horizon has changed. And I think that's the biggest outcome that we've all got collectively from this first sort of chaotic early cycle.
Oh, actually, another thing I wanted to ask you, because I keep reading some preliminary reports for next year, like a lot of advice to CTOs and all that kind of stuff. And I see a lot of experts keep saying the same thing, which is stop chasing the best AI model. Please think about the fundamentals. How are the fundamentals? And I wanted to ask you, so we talked about previous tech waves and how AI is not that different, but it somehow feels that this time fundamentals like don't apply anymore. Or did everybody just forget about the importance all of a sudden of the basics? Like, do you think it's true at all? Or
I think everybody forgot about the basics. I mean, that's how I would. I mean, I think everybody did. I think everybody thought that this technology was going to change everything, and everybody very rapidly put all their eggs in one basket and thought that things would be different on the other side. Now, I'm being a little bit dramatic, but I'm saying it that way because I absolutely believe that that if you didn't start with first principles, you now need to return to first principles, right? And begin saying, well, what is it that my business does? How can I apply this technology to what I do, for the most successful outcome that I can possibly achieve? Now, again, the thing that's different about this technology in some ways, well, not necessarily different. I guess the thing that's different is the scale at which this applies, right? So if you think about new music formats or going from videotape to DVDs to streaming, right? That affected everybody, but from a business perspective, it was a fairly sort of narrow and channeled type of experience, right? It impacted everybody in the chain, but it wasn't like everybody all at once, right? Consumers had to wait for certain things to evolve in order to get to certain points, right? And then all of a sudden, I didn't watch VHS tapes anymore. I was just streaming everything on Netflix with DVDs in between. I think to go back to first principles, you have to say, where is my business today? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? How can I apply this new technology to those problems? The new dimension is that everybody's applying it to all of their problems simultaneously, which introduces a higher risk of existential threat to your own business model from competitors or startups, right? So you might have a business model today that previously was somewhat insulated because of whatever your technological advantage was. You had more data, you had better systems, you had a customer base, or something that gave you a bit of a differentiator or a cutting edge. I do think that this particular technology evolution or revolution is, as other technologies have done, pulling down the barriers to competition in a much faster way. Again, that said, just because I come up with a competing business model to an institution that's existed for 100 years doesn't mean that their 27 million customers are suddenly going to become my customers. So no matter how quickly this stuff evolves, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that people don't change that quickly. They just can't, right? Parts of them can, but as with the baby analogy, you're not a different person after that baby arrives. You become a different person going forward. And so that's the change that I think we don't fully, is boring, honestly. If you think about it, it moves too slow. Nobody wants that headline, right? But for me, the people part of it, that's the part where the work continues on, the challenges will remain. And to go back to what you were saying earlier, that's what we're here to help people with. And it's what I think we've been here to help people with from the beginning of DataArt's existence, right? Is how you manage the constantly evolving landscape of change in your business and using technology to enable solutions for where you're trying to get to, right? The outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Right. Alistair, and culturally, when you see companies that succeed these days, not talking about the tech stack, like what is it that, what is it that they all have in common? The ones that succeed culturally, structurally, people-wise, what is it that they have?
They have really smart people who collaborate well together, right? So they have people who enjoy working on the problems that they're trying to solve. They have people who know how to work together to solve those problems. They have experience solving those problems, or they have the energy and the enthusiasm to solve a problem that they've never solved before, right? So the culture is one of openness in terms of communication, openness in terms of questioning what it is we're doing and how we might do it differently. And then fairly quickly, they have processes. I mean, that's a boring word, but they have ways of working that support that culture, right? So that are practiced, right? That they've been there before, right? It's that sense of, we know how to work together or with our partners to solve whatever challenge is coming at us, right? You can take any challenge you had before AI that you were trying to solve with technology. It's the same challenge. Now you're using a different tool set. So you might operate a little differently, think a little differently, have different solutions. But I think the organizations that will succeed, that are succeeding, are the ones that had that problem solving capability and that culture of support and the ability to fail safe built into them from the start.
Right. Alistair, you're right, actually. Like, the more you talk, the more I can see how all that translates to real life. Like, what is it that, makes you succeed? It's communication, being open and questioning things with your partner, with your friends, family, at work. So it's very interesting to actually see how relatable that is to anyone, not just to, developers.
Yeah. And everybody's going to need that, right? I mean, so the thing that is happening right now for sure is everybody feels threatened, right? I feel threatened. Like, am I going to, are consultants or advisors or people with knowledge going to be needed, or are people just going to be tapping something into an engine and getting something back? And the answer is that yes, and right, people are going to be doing all of that in the future. And how I communicate with people and how I communicate with my teams will evolve and change. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be people trying to figure out how to solve problems. And instead of stones and flint trying to start a fire, right, we're going to be trying to figure out, how this new technology is going to help us solve different kinds of problems, not heat and cooking, but, maybe the future of humanity and not having our planet burn to the ground around us.
Alistair, I really want to ask you this question that just came to my head. We might edit it out, I'm not sure, but I'm very curious. When I read media and the headlines and the comments and everything to just stay very, up to date, I see a lot of people reacting to AI conversations with a huge eye roll, being like, enough already, guys. Stop it. We get it, okay? We get it. And I wanted to ask you, Alistair, is it important to still keep having the conversations? Or is it like, okay, whatever, so what? And if it is important, why is it important to talk about AI?
It's absolutely important. I think the eye rolling comes. I mean, I don't know why the eye rolling comes, right? Everybody's going to roll their eyes at some point. But I would take away from eye rolling at this point in a certain way as saying, like, we're done with a certain type of conversation, right? But you can't eye roll at what's happening, fundamentally, right? Like that's crazy. Like, I think we can be done or tired of certain conversations that we've been having for the last 6 months or the last 6 minutes, right? But this conversation won't ever end. I mean, this isn't something that just goes away. You could even pick a previous technology that certain aspects of the world got very excited about around blockchain, right? Which got fairly boring fairly quickly for people, but honestly still exists and underpins a huge amount of sort of global change in technology services, maybe not as broadly as AI, but it's still out there. It's still doing its thing as an idea, as a concept, right? The tools, the implementations, the way it works, that's all different. The same is going to happen for AI, right? So the conversation can't end. I mean, that's crazy. What are you not talking about? What is actually happening in the world? Like, that's not that, for me, that would be insane. I think the way we have the conversations, the topics that we're having the conversations about, I think is already changing. I think, I could get on board probably with some of the comments if what we're talking about is yet another conversation about how amazing something is and what it can do for you, right? Or the way it can be implemented. That's super boring. What I'm interested in is how can we take what we've learned and apply it to the problem I have today to make some sort of change in my business tomorrow. And that's an eternal conversation, right? That's evergreen. That's always going to happen.
Oh, I'm glad I asked. And say if I were, I don't know, a CTO of a large company and I've been doing, building software the traditional way for ages, but now I'm under pressure to, I don't know, do something with AI, but I cannot, afford to mess up what we already have. So what's the conversation I should be having internally, for instance, before talking to a vendor?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this goes back a little bit to when you asked, are people ready? I mean, I think one of the things that people that is difficult to get ready is a clear statement of what your problems are, right? So even before you get to things like, is your data ready, which is, of course, an important technical problem to have ready, you need to understand what your problems are, right? So if there's somebody out there who's been working in their traditional ways, and we have some customers who are like this, right? And they're maybe even a little bit AI aware and forward, and maybe even sort of think they understand it. Or let's say that they don't really understand it at all, right? A more extreme case. But they're getting pressure from their board or their leadership to do something with AI, as you said. The place that I would hope that we would start, the place that I would personally start, is with a conversation around what are the problems that you face today in your business, not in your technology, not in your data, not in any of those things, but what is a business problem that you're trying to solve, right? Technology is basically behind everything, right? Every business problem or every business solution. So what's the problem that you're facing? And how can we break that down into a small enough piece that we can take a step forward, right? That we can make an experiment and you can decide how meaningful you need that experiment to be, right? Maybe you're at a pressure point where you need to really try to make a big splash, or maybe you're at a place where you can just take a step forward and bring back some information, some data, some results to continue the conversation. But if you haven't anchored yourself in a problem, there's very little, in my experience, way to move forward in a meaningful manner, because what you end up doing is spending your time talking about the tool, the shiny object, right? A little bit of data around what that is. And it never moves beyond the abstraction of technology into something that somebody else can understand, right? The business doesn't understand tools. The business doesn't understand, story points or, 5 defects less than you had the month before. I mean, they might have some idea of it, but it's not meaningful to them, right? It's not like we did another $1 million in sales or we acquired, 25,000 new customers, which are the language that is the language that they would want to hear. So I would want to start with somebody who's facing this predicament with, well, what's the real problem you need to solve? And then let's figure out how we can use AI or any technology, but AI in this case, to help you design an experiment to solve that problem or
Right.
attempt that problem.
I really appreciate your like common sense approach and how direct you are and very, very clear. I could, keep asking you questions for another day, but I need, as I wrap up, Alistair, I always like to ask our guests if they have any unpopular opinions on the topic. So is there like a hot take you could offer us that
A hot take. Well, I don't know that I'm known for my hot takes, but I think that maybe my hot take is that I don't think AI is as scary or as revolutionary as everybody out there would have you believe. I think that it is evolutionary. I think that it will, of course, fundamentally change a lot of things in our society. It absolutely has already disrupted, technology and how we think about technology. But if you look at, what it's going to actually take from a infrastructure, literally building data centers and providing enough power to do all the things that people say they're going to do or want to do with AI, we're already running into a massive amount of inertia. And so I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I just don't think things will actually change as rapidly and therefore not as dramatically as everybody thinks is going to happen. I think we will get increasingly smaller and smaller and smaller amounts of change as we go forward. And on top of that, there will be a lid pushing down on what the sort of literal physical constraints are, both in terms of human consumption of this technology and literally the infrastructure and support that's required to enable it as we go forward. So another way to say that is, I don't think this is going to be as dramatic as everybody makes it out to be.
Whew, thank God. That's kind of refreshing to hear, actually. And just to end on a future looking note, when you think about next year, I'm going to combine these two questions I have in my head because I wanted to ask you, hey, what do you think about 2026? Like, what should we all be watching most closely? And another thing I wanted to ask, like, you, Alistair, like you personally, what is it that you are most excited about in this area? Like not necessarily for work, but generally in this area. So whatever question you want to answer, I would be happy to hear.
Like what am I most excited about in terms of AI for me
Yeah.
personally?
Yeah.
All right. So the thing that I actually got the most excited about when it got to a certain point, other than like just fascinated by how amazing the technology was, the thing that I got most excited about was, so I'm not an engineer. Like, I'm not sure I've ever written any lines of code other than when I was like maybe doing something in BASIC and teaching a turtle how to make turns on a screen when I was like in grade school. I just never had the ability to sit in front of a screen long enough and type. So the thing that I actually got the most excited about recently was actually learning how to become a developer. And so the thing that I have been experimenting with personally is how to, I mean, I guess it's a version of vibe coding, but basically how can I take a problem, an idea that I have, and use these tools that everybody says, allows everybody to do everything so quickly, and literally turn an idea in my head into a working application, a mobile app or a website or whatever. And so for me personally, that's been the most exciting, right? Because it's allowed me to take something that, I mean, I guess arguably I know a lot about what it is to be a developer, right? But as I'm saying, I've literally never developed code in my life, and try to teach myself how to do that, not how to be a programmer, right? Not how to write the lines of code, right? Because AI does all that for me. So what I'm actually doing is taking my problem, like I want to create a memory box that I can search of everything that I've ever done in my entire life. right? And you can start typing in those ideas into any number of the tools that have evolved and start getting back code, user interface, how to do the data, all of the different things that you would do. And then I can work through, again, just in my own language, plain English, what it is I want to accomplish and see it coming to life. But because it's actually developing the software, I actually do have to go in and try to understand what those problems are. So again, maybe it's not actually teaching me to be a developer, but it's allowed me to take ideas that I've had in my head and develop them, right, on my own, as opposed to needing a developer. Now, what I've learned in all of that is that I, by not being a developer, actually fairly quickly have no idea what I'm doing and desperately want a developer to be sitting next to me, to be helping me figure out what it is I'm doing and how it is I need to, address the problems that I'm seeing. So in some ways, it's actually validating what we talked about earlier, which is people are going to be essential throughout this entire process, right? I can't actually, as of today, go out and just develop something on my own. At a certain point, I want to be able to turn to somebody and say, hey, how do we solve this problem? What is the problem I'm seeing here, right? How do we help move this forward? And so for me, that's, at least in my own world, a perfect example of what the technology is enabling, and yet how the human element is going to remain for basically forever. I just don't ever see that changing.
Oh, great. Oh, I'm really happy to hear that. When you said at some point you realized that you need actually help from an actual developer, I wanted to say from an actual human developer, right? It's
Human
not human developers. So yeah, that's refreshing to hear.
Absolutely.
Good. Alistair, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think we need more direct and honest conversations like this. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Anni. Thank you for the time. It was a pleasure to speak. I really appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And if you have any thoughts on this, or if you disagree completely with something we said, please tell us at biztechforward@dataart.com. But that's all for now, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to BizTech Forward. Be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast to stay updated. Join us next time. Presented by DataArt.